Right, we now go to questions to the Prime Minister. And I start with Gavin Newlands. Gavin.
Number one, Mr Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm delighted that the UK is hosting the leaders of the world's greatest democracies at the G7 summit in Cornwall this week. This is the first meeting between G7 leaders since the start of the pandemic. Mr Speaker, this week is Carers Week, and I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in thanking care workers and everyone caring for family, friends and loved ones. Their selflessness and devotion to helping others is an inspiration to us all. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I very much echo the comments of the Prime Minister on the work of unpaid carers. But after plenty of warm words for the victims of fire and rehire, including from the Prime Minister himself, the Government yesterday announced its legislative response to the ACAS report of doing absolutely nothing. Nothing for the hundreds of thousands already threatened, or as the ACAS report itself says, the many, many more that are anticipated to face fire and rehire when the furlough scheme ends. He should be thoroughly ashamed of himself, Mr Speaker. It's increasingly clear this Government won't protect workers, so will it devolve employment law to Holyrood so the Scottish Government can?
Actually, Mr Speaker, the Government has been absolutely clear that it's unacceptable to use threats of firing and rehiring as a negotiating tactic. We welcome the ACAS report, which actually finds that hire and fire should only be used in limited circumstances, such as to prevent job losses, Mr Speaker, when other options have been exhausted. We therefore asked ACAS to produce clearer guidance to help employers with other options.
Bradley.
Prime Minister, we're on a mission in the East Midlands to create 84,000 jobs for local people. We're legislating for planning powers for our development corporation, which will work in tandem with our unique inland freeport. But, Mr Speaker, decisions about HS2 and specifically the Toton Hub will have a huge impact on whether we can deliver on our vision for the East Midlands. Would the Prime Minister meet with me urgently so we can make sure we can deliver on that commitment to local people?
Mr Speaker, the East Midlands could have no more fervent or effective champion, and I congratulate my honourable friend on his vision for the East Midlands Freeport and all the benefits that rail integration will bring. And I know that he's about to have a meeting with ministerial colleagues to determine how the integrated rail plan can work with HS2 best to achieve his objectives.
Let's go to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is the first PMQ since the Prime Minister and Carrie got married. So can I offer my warm congratulations to the Prime Minister and his wife and wish them a happy life together. I have to say I admire the way they managed to keep it secret. Can I join with the Prime Minister on his comments about Carers Week? And can I also send our deepest sympathies to the 4 people killed in Sunday's terror attack in Canada? It was, as the Canadian Prime Minister said, an attack motivated by hatred and Islamophobia, and we must all unite against that at home and abroad. And can I ask the Prime Minister to pass on our thoughts and condolences to the Canadian Prime Minister when he sees him later this week? Mr Speaker, why does the Prime Minister think that his now former education adviser, Kevan Collins, described the government's education plan as half-hearted, that risked failing thousands of children, hundreds of thousands of children, and not being even close to meeting the scale of what is needed?
Mr Speaker, first of all, I want to thank Kevan Collins for his work, and but above all, I want to thank actually pupils, parents, teachers for everything they've done throughout this pandemic. And the struggle has been enormous, and actually what the government is doing is, in addition to the £14 billion, the extra £14 billion we committed, taking per pupil funding in primary schools up to £4,000 per head, in secondary schools up to £5,150, Mr Speaker. We're now putting another £3 billion into educational catch-up with the biggest tutoring programme anywhere in the world, Mr Speaker, and it is based on the best evidence that we could find and that Sir Kevan could supply.
Keir Starmer.
Mr Speaker, let me get this right. In February, the Prime Minister appoints an expert to come up with a catch-up plan for education. He's a highly respected expert, consults widely and comes up with a plan. The Treasury balks at it and says we'll only provide 10%, yes, 1/10 of what's needed. The Prime Minister rolls over whatever he says and children lose out. So much for levelling up. Let me help the Prime Minister with the numbers. The funding he announced last week is about £50 per child per year. And even if you add in previous announcements, in England it's only £310 per child over 4 years. Yet in the US there's a catch-up plan worth £1,600 per child. And in the Netherlands it's £2,500. So can the Prime Minister explain, when he was told by his expert that he appointed that only an ambitious, fully funded catch-up plan would do, only an ambitious, fully funded catch-up plan, why did he come up with something which, in the words of that same expert, is too small, too narrow and too slow?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the right honourable gentleman needs to do the maths, because and he needs to do some catch-up on his own mathematics, because in addition to the 14 billion I've already referred to, Mr. Speaker, there was already another £1.5 billion of catch-up. This is a £3 billion catch-up plan just for starters, Mr. Speaker, and it includes the biggest programme of tuition of 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-3 tutorials anywhere in the world. And we all know, Mr. Speaker, that there are schools in this country, classrooms in this country, where children are getting private tutorials, private tuition, thanks to the hard work of their parents. He asks about levelling up. What we want to do is get on the side of all the kids who don't have access to that tutorial, Mr. Speaker, to support them. That's what I mean by levelling up, Mr. Speaker.
Who does the Prime Minister think he's kidding? He asked Kevan Collins to tell him what was necessary to catch up. Kevan Collins told him, and he said no. Who does he think he's kidding? The Chancellor's decision, and I assume it was the Chancellor's decision, it always is, to hold back the investment that's needed is a completely false economy. The long-term costs are likely to be at least £100 billion, probably more, and who will be hardest hit, Prime Minister? Kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. Mr. Speaker, if the government doesn't change course, this will hold Britain back for a generation. And here's the difference between us and them. Because when Labour says education is our #1 priority, we mean it. That's why we published a bold £15 billion plan to catch up on education for every child. We're putting that to a vote this afternoon. If the Prime Minister is really serious about this, he'd back that motion. Will he do so?
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you the difference between us and the party opposite is that we put in the tough measures that are needed to give kids a better education across the country. When we rolled out the Academies programme, Mr. Speaker, which have driven up standards across the country, who opposed it? They did. When we put in tough measures to ensure discipline in schools, Mr. Speaker, they opposed it. At the last election, Mr. Speaker, they even campaigned to get rid of Ofsted, which is so vital. They did. He stood on a manifesto to get rid of Ofsted. Will he now say that he not only supports our tuition programme, but he supports our radical programme to support teachers with better training? £400 million we're now putting in, not only a starting salary for teachers of £30,000, which we've introduced, but another £400 million to support better training for teachers. That's what we're backing in our party. They are serious, costed reforms that are based on evidence, unlike anything he's producing.
Just a moment. I'll have a little less shouting from the side. Just to remind the Prime Minister, his Prime Minister's questions, it isn't about the agenda of the last general election. Keir Starmer. The Prime Minister, Ofsted, was not the question. I'm not interested in what they put on the agenda. I'm more interested in you answering the question. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, let me take this very slowly for the Prime Minister. The Collins review commissioned by the government was very clear. If the Collins proposed action is not taken, the attainment gap will rise between 10 and 24%. That was on a slide shown to the Prime Minister last week. And he talks about the various measures, so let's look at this more closely. Which part of our plan does he oppose? The plan that's being voted on this afternoon. Is it breakfast clubs for every child? Does he oppose that? Is it quality mental health support in every school? Does he oppose that? Is it more tutoring for every child that needs it? Does he oppose that? Or additional investment for children who've suffered the most? Which part of our plan does the Prime Minister object to? And if he doesn't object to it and he agrees with it, why doesn't he vote for it?
Mr. Speaker. I think I'm, with great respect, Mr. Speaker, I do think I'm entitled to draw attention to what the Labour Party stood on at the last election. And that was, and they haven't yet repudiated it, they did want to get rid of Ofsted, Mr. Speaker. But I will tell the right honourable gentleman that if he is now saying that he supports our tutoring programme, and that's what I think I understood from him just now, then that is a good thing, because hitherto what has happened is that the kids of well-off parents, thanks to their hard work, have been able to rely on private tutoring. What the government is now doing is coming in on the side of all the other kids who don't get access to that tuition. 6 million kids, 6 million children, Mr. Speaker, 6 million children will have access to tuition thanks to this programme. It is a fantastic thing. It is a revolution in education for this country. If he's now saying that he supports it, Mr. Speaker, then that's a good thing, though I've learnt in the course of the last year that his support can sometimes be evanescent, Mr. Speaker.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he pretends he's here for the other kids. The report says the attainment gap will go up between 10 to 24% if the action isn't taken. He's just rejected it. How can he be on the side of the other kids? Come off it. We've been here before. Free school meals, U-turn. Exams fiasco, U-turn. Now catch up. The Prime Minister's been all over the place when it comes to education. And he's on the wrong side of it again. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to this week's G7. This will be the first major summit of since the recovery. The UK needs to lead, not just to host. The priority must, of course, be a clear plan to vaccinate the world. As the Delta variant shows, nobody is safe from this virus until everybody is safe. The Prime Minister has made big promises on this, but it needs a truly global effort to make it happen. So will the Prime Minister take the lead at the G7 and do whatever is necessary to make global vaccinations a reality?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. And actually, I think what the people of this country also understand is that not only were we able to give one of the first authorisations for the AstraZeneca, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, but also, thanks to the deal the government did between the Oxford scientists and AstraZeneca, we were able to ensure that 1 in 3 of the 1.5 billion doses that have been distributed around the world are the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. That is global Britain in action, to say nothing of the billion vaccines that we hope to raise from the G7 this week.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, that would sound a lot better if the Prime Minister wasn't the only G7 leader cutting his aid budget. I hear what the Prime Minister says about vaccines, but we also need clear global agreement and global funding. Hundreds of former leaders, businesses and development groups have called for exactly that kind of leadership at the G7. And that's what we need to see from the Prime Minister this weekend. Mr. Speaker, the G7, bilateral discussions with President Biden and the possibility of a new government in Israel also provide a real chance to restart a meaningful Middle East peace process. The appalling violence recently, which killed 63 children in Gaza and 2 children in Israel, shows just how urgent this is. For too many people in Palestine, the promise of an end to the occupation and a recognised sovereign Palestinian state feels more distant than ever. So will the Prime Minister take the opportunity this weekend to press for renewed international agreement, to finally recognise the state of Palestine alongside a safe and secure Israel, to stop the expansion of illegal settlements and to get a meaningful peace process back up and running?
Mr. Speaker, it's been a long-standing objective of this government, and I think it's common ground across this House that the solution for the Middle East peace process is a two-state solution. We continue to press for that, and I've made that position plain in my conversations both with the Palestinian Authority and, of course, with Israel. Mr. Speaker, he attacked the government, I think, for failing to be sufficiently ambitious in our overseas aid spending. I think I heard him say that in that compendious question. And let me just tell him, well, he's gesturing at these benches, Mr. Speaker. Under this government, we've spent more, and we continue to spend more than Labour ever did. Labour ever did. Under Blair, under Brown, even when they were spending money on Brazilian dancers in Hackney to raise consciousness, which is what they did, to raise consciousness of global poverty, Mr. Speaker. We are spending £10 billion a year at a time of acute financial difficulty for this country, and I think the British people know that is the right priority for this country. And I think, if Labour members want to vote on that matter, Mr. Speaker, and may I just remind them that the people of this country had an opportunity to vote on the way the government is handling it last month and the balance that we were striking, and I think that they adjudicated firmly in the favour of the government, Mr. Speaker. They pontificate and prevaricate and procrastinate.
Felicity Kendall, come on!